So, hi Nuala, thanks so much for joining us here today. I'm delighted that you're here to be able to talk about Department of Work and Pensions assesses the Jade fish. And the odds of me waxing lyrical and possibly going on a tangent away from the pre-agreed questions are high, so I apologise to both you and subsequent listeners for that. So, to do introductions, I'm Hannah Tweed and I manage the Scottish Sensory Hub at the Alliance. Scottish Sensory Hub provides a cross-sensory platform for the voice of lived experience for anyone in Scotland who is deaf, deafblind, or who has a visual impairment. And it focuses on 3 key areas to promote living a good life: communication, information, and mobility. And here with me today, we've got Nuala Watt, who lives in Glasgow. She's a poet and disability activist, and she's got a PhD from the University of Glasgow, which focused on partial sight and poetic form. Her first collection, The Department of Work and Pensions Assesses a Jade Fish, was published this February by Bloom Diode Press. And I think this is your first poetry collection, and by my reading, much of the content centres around your experiences of disability and motherhood, and I mean, I'd argue there's a universality but to both themes, to be honest. Before we kick off in earnest, can I just check your preferred language around sight?
Partial sight.
Okay. So could you talk a little bit about what prompted you in writing the poems in the department? I want to abbreviate it, call it the Department of Work and Pensions, but that doesn't work.
No, I mean, I can talk to you about the Department of Work and Pensions, but
perhaps not now.
Bleep.
Sorry, can you talk a little bit about what prompted you in writing your poems as a selection?
I've always liked poetry. I think it's a good way of thinking. But as I was growing up with my head full of poems, I noticed that there weren't many disabled people in the poems, and the disabled people who were there in order for a non-disabled narrator/poet to have an epiphany. And they tended to have no distinguishing features beyond their impairment, which was presented as an overwhelming source of incapacity, an overwhelming tragedy that defined their entire life. And this was interestingly particularly true of blind people. I think that blindness in particular is a trope of total incapacity, and also there are very few portrayals in literature of partial sight as opposed to total blindness, even though I think total blindness affects something like 3% of visually impaired people.
Yeah.
But partial sight, it isn't very prominent in literature. So there weren't really many people like me. There weren't disabled people with complex, interesting lives that were affected by things other than their disability. And there certainly weren't disabled people who could see any perks to being disabled. So because I couldn't find myself in literature, I basically gate crashed. And I wrote the poems. Over a long period, there's an actual poem in there from when I was 19.
Yeah.
The subjects have broadened out, but because initially I was just so annoyed that I wrote poems about how inaccurate these portrayals were and how annoying the entire situation was. It still is, but I've broadened out a bit. And in fact, I think it is important in a poetry collection about disability to sometimes have poems about something else entirely, because our lives also contain other things.
Yeah.
And that's actually a political statement. Most poems are directly about disability in some way, but let's throw in one about Quakerism because it's in my life too. And it's important to point out that we do have lives beyond our diagnoses.
Yeah. I know when you were preparing to publish the collection, you had some concerns about accessibility, particularly given what we're reflecting on here.
Yeah.
And I know these are wider issues across the publishing landscape, but particularly in poetry, where so many publishing presses are really small and they're on good way to shoestring and an awful lot of stubbornness. Can you talk to us a bit about how I think you worked with RNIB about
Yes.
ensuring that the Department of Work and Pensions assesses a Jade Fish was more accessible for a wider audience?
Well, I thought, given the poems, given the subject, it was absolutely essential that it be available in a mix of accessible formats. Because I can read print, and have always been able to read print, I was appalled when I explained to someone I know with a different visual impairment than me that the book would only be available in print, because it had not occurred to me that I just didn't think about it because I can read print.
Yeah.
And there is an expectation that as a disabled person you will be able to think of all these complexities, but actually you think from your own embodied experience. So it wasn't an exceptionally surprising mistake, but I was mortified. And I wrote on RNIB Connect Scotland, which is a Facebook group, "This is my situation, what do I do?" And they said, talk to the RNIB reading service. Here it is. And I wrote on the RNIB's contact form and explaining my situation, and I was expecting, go away, we've never heard of you. But instead, I very quickly got an email from the RNIB saying, "We would be delighted to turn your book into multiple formats. Can you send us a PDF?" And they did it very quickly. They turned it into Braille and synthetic audio and a very large print. And it was up on RNIB Bookshare really, really quickly.
Yeah.
And then, because for nothing, I didn't have to pay. And then, which completely shocked my publisher. And then they said, "We've had a lot of very positive feedback about this. We would like to turn it into an audiobook with an actor." And I was surprised but delighted. I love audiobooks. I don't belong to the RNIB reading service, but I will join so that I can listen to my own book. And the other thing that the RNIB did was they got me to record a poem called "Pregnant and Squint" for World Poetry Day, and they stuck up on their social media channels. They also got me to write something about my experience of visual impairment in poetry, which then went into the Glasgow Times. The RNIB are extremely helpful, extremely efficient, and really I do not have a bad word to say about them. And until very recently I had no contact with them because I don't have the kind of sight loss that requires extensive training in the use of assistive technology, so I simply had not met the RNIB. But having met them, I think they're wonderful.
Excellent. And the end product benefits everybody, I would suggest.
Yeah, there was a glorious point where somebody commented on Facebook following my book being put into RNIB Bookshare, so different formats, that she was using it. She was using the first poem, which is called "Receiving My Poems in Braille," to do her Braille homework, which was beautiful, because receiving my poems in Braille is about refusing heatedly to learn Braille aged 11 because I could read print. And then getting my poems transliterated into Braille some years later and realising that not only could I not access them, I didn't even know which way up they were supposed to be. I could identify one of them because it was much shorter than the others, but as for whether it was upside down, I don't know.
Maybe the LHR might have been manageable.
Yeah.
Probably the NB1, just because it's shaped.
Yeah.
Triangularly.
Yeah. But I think it's beautiful that somebody was using this poem in Braille to do my Braille practice. And I just really wished I could go back in time to the teacher who tried insisting I learn Braille. Said, no, I won't be learning Braille because I don't need it, but don't worry, in 30 years' time I'll write a poem. Someone else will use it to practice Braille. Will that do?
I think they'd probably count that as a win, to be honest.
Yeah.
No, that sounds really excellent. I'm delighted to hear that the availability is there. And that's also sort of a useful learning point around, different forms of user access and how to get there.
And I'm very pleased that there will be an audio with an actor, because synthetic audio with the best will in the world doesn't understand about rhythm or line endings or anything that's actually quite important for poetry. I remember putting my villanelle, which is a very rhythmical, very organised rhyming form, through synthetic audio, and it was hilarious, but it didn't sound like a villanelle at all.
Interesting in itself, but not actually helpful, I would think, for an engagement with that particular text.
Yeah.
Just thinking about some of the other poems that stood out to me. I mean, I could talk about any of them, frankly, but I'm trying to keep us to time. The disabled person's travel card, when I read it, it basically said to colleagues before we started that in a page and a half, you had a wittier, pointed summary of some of the problems around accessible travel in this country and problems with system design. And we take 100 pages to make the same points, and you manage it in a page and a half.
Incidentally, you work with different formats, so you may not find it useful. But if you do find it useful, I'm sure we could allow you to use it.
Yeah. Right. That's a useful observation for me as well. Not what I was expecting to work in. I was going to ask you, to talk a bit more about that poem in particular. I mean, your positioning. I'm thinking your position statements around poetry as activism and disability rights work. And I know you've written about that in things like Stairs Whispers collection, 2011, 2017. It was not this decade. Thank you. You got in there. So is that sort of positioning of the activism role of poetry around that time in particular?
Well, I have a national entitlement card which entitles me to free travel anywhere in Scotland, but it ran out in 2022. And this should have been a non-event because I've still got the conditions that entitled me to the card. But instead, it took 4 months to get it renewed, and it would not have been renewed if I hadn't had a friend reform in this area who took over because I was exhausted. I realised that this process where you say to the authority, give me such and such, please, or do this for me. The authority figure says, I can't do that for you because I need X, and this gets repeated endlessly. You are running around trying to bring the authority figure whatever it is they say they need. And in the end, it turns out that they were never going to give you it anyway. And it occurred to me that this is exactly the structure of the nursery rhyme Soldier, Soldier, Won't You Marry Me? The speaker wants the soldier to marry her. He says, no, I can't, because I need X item of clothing. She gets a number of items of clothing, but then he says, actually, I can't marry you because I'm already married. And the structure is exactly the same. So I wrote the poem. I actually wrote the poem remarkably quickly, because if you have a structure underneath, it's much quicker, it's much easier. And it's a useful piece of activism because almost anybody who's visually impaired and has mobility problems in Scotland will have some experience with this card. Maybe they've had it and lost it. Maybe they've helped someone else try to get it. It's a very important piece of plastic. And most people will have at some point interacted with getyournec.com. And when somebody actually an acquaintance took disabled person's travel card, to a creative writing workshop at Glasgow Disability Alliance, who are a campaigning organisation that I used to do a lot with before I had my daughter. It had got a very strong reaction because most people had been there and done that, even to the point of going, oh yeah, I know that website. And people, even people who don't have an extensive knowledge of poetry, will probably at some point have met soldier, what you know what I mean?
Yeah, I certainly, it took me a moment when reading it to recognise it, but I knew that I knew it.
Yes, I drove some of the people in my poetry group up the wall because they were like, I don't know this.
Where do I know this sound from?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's
because it's a well-known text, even people who don't have poetry in their head very much can identify it and can feel included and can say, yeah, that's me, I did that.
Yeah. And there's an inclusiveness to that is not necessarily in the experience you're conveying, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Just thinking about some of the other poems in the collection that stood out, I mentioned that several of them I read as reflecting on disabled motherhood. And you know, I think you've talked elsewhere with me about how few poems there are that do that, and frankly, how infuriating that is. And Pregnant and Swin you mentioned. I loved Oboe and I don't know if I've pronounced that correctly.
Yes,
I know how to read, and I've never said.
Oboe.
Great thing to discover in a line or two. And You and I Go Shopping. So yeah, could you reflect on writing those at first?
Yeah, Pregnant and Squint is the only poem I have ever seen about being a pregnant disabled woman. And bear in mind, I have a lifetime's poems in my head. These include things like Soldier, Soldier, Won't You Marry Me, which I've known since childhood, but they also include a vast range of poetry, old and new, and in different languages. I don't know all poetry, but I know a lot of poetry.
I wouldn't want to get a poetry pub quiz with you, so no. Not on a different team.
And also, I have read a lot of poems about motherhood because there are lots of poems about motherhood. Of course, there are. It's a very common experience. But in all that time, I have never read a poem about being a pregnant disabled woman except the one I wrote. And that's appalling.
Yeah.
Now, there might be those poems, but I have not found them yet. There is a poem by an American poet called Ona Gritz. I think that's how you pronounce her name. It's about breastfeeding a newborn if you yourself have cerebral palsy, which I can vouch for the difficulty of that, because when children are older, they can look after their own heads and place themselves in approximately the right position, but newborns can't. It's very difficult. It can be done. It's spectacularly difficult. And insteadly, midwives and other health professionals are not trained in helping people with cerebral palsy breastfeed. And so that exists. And I remember being amazed when I found it in Beauty as a Verb, which is an American anthology of disability poetry from 2011. And I'm very pleased. I'm going to be in a Blood Axe anthology of disabled poets next year, edited by Rachel Boast. And my poem, which is not Pregnant and Squint, but never mind, will be on a facing page with that poem, Ona Gritz's poem. So happy because I was one who said to Rachel, you might want to include this one. But yeah, I should not be my poem should not be the only poem I know about being a pregnant disabled woman. That's just ridiculous. And in fact, the poem has been filmed a number of times. It's a very successful poem, but still, there should be more. What I found about being pregnant and disabled was amazing because as a visibly disabled person, I get really stupid reactions quite a lot of the time. But when I was pregnant, I didn't, because people understand pregnancy, they know how to talk about it. Basically, pregnancy told disabilities to sit down and shut up. It's great. I got 9 months off, which is not a narrative that I would have expected at all. So there's that one. Overall is an obol is an ancient Greek coin. It wasn't worth very much, but there was a tradition that when you died, you needed an obol to pay the ferryman to cross the river Styx and go to the underworld. Virgil, who's a Latin poet, has a very upsetting passage about all the souls who didn't have an obol, so they are stuck on the wrong side of the Styx and they can't go anywhere. Anyway, you needed an obol if you died, so people would put an obol in your mouth because you couldn't carry it any other way. And I, as a disabled parent with very slow reflexes, complex visual problems and poor balance, was very worried that my 1-year-old, for example, would shove a coin in her mouth and die. She never did. But I was really worried about it. So I wrote a poem in which I imagined that happening. And it's a horrible poem in some respects. Because it imagines the worst thing that could possibly happen. But it held that fear and contained it in a form that could be possible to stop it from going everywhere. And in fact, I was very lucky. My daughter tended not to put things in her mouth, but she could have. And I put it in a sonnet, which is a very intricate rhyming form, and the only disabled is one of the few end words in that poem that doesn't rhyme, because it needs to have attention drawn to itself. The other is curmudgeon, which is a description of Cameron the ferryman. The rest of them are all half rhymes, so they all stick together, but disabled is sticking out. And the line is, it's half my life since I felt this disabled, because I really was petrified. And after I'd written the poem, I was kind of appalled, because even saying these things out loud, my child could die. And let's imagine what would happen if she did. That's really, really awful.
And yet, reading that, I also think that's like, I'm going to say catastrophizing.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what it is. It's also one of those universal things that I read.
Yeah.
In terms of reflections on Shobia Permini, who has a hand of the fear about these chaos gremlins.
Yeah.
But as you say, I drew attention to it. I totally agree that it's horrible. I don't mean that as an insult to your poetry.
No, it's not a horrible poem technically, or in terms of sound patterns, it's a good poem. But it contains something absolutely horrible.
On more different, on a different trajectory, we've got what I was about to call the Easter poem, which is an ironic reference.
And you and I go shopping. Entirely different kind of poem. Child in it is much older. She is 5. And it's about going on a very short shopping expedition down the street where we live, to the garage, to get an Easter egg with my daughter. And she was 5, and yet it was the first time I had been anywhere with her without assistance, because the only thing I could do as a disabled parent with a toddler and with difficult reflexes, the obol factor, was have people with me, especially outside. So I was utterly, utterly petrified on this very short journey over a very familiar,
with a very
well-behaved child, because actually she is a very well-behaved child. And having been told how to walk with mummy, she did it.
Bribed by chocolate.
But actually she is, I'm very lucky. And she understands that the rules for going out with mummy are different than the rules for going out with daddy. So we went shopping, and for any other parent and child pairing, but maybe wouldn't have been worth writing a poem about. Not a very good poem. But for me it was epic. Because we went shopping, we successfully went shopping and got the Easter egg. But I realised that I needed some mobility aids. I was going to do that regularly, because ordinarily parent holds child's hand, keeps child safe. Actually, I asked my daughter not to hold my hand because she'd be a lot safer if she didn't. And it also says in the poem, going to the shop is the whole plot of the morning. Although in all the books you can recite, no parent moves like me, which is true. There are no disabled parents in children's fiction books, or if there are, I haven't found them. So I'm very fond of Your I Go Shopping. I wrote it, and then I was just like, oh, well, it's a poem. And then it turned out to be very popular. So I finished off my set when the book was published with that, because I asked a disabled poet I know for advice on my set. And he said, well, I'm looking up my favourites. And one of my favourites was Your I Go Shopping. And I was like, seriously?
Having look at that.
But I think, and I think that it is political to write these poems about disabled parenthood, because there aren't any.
And the everyday. Yeah, importance of the everyday, I think, is so much at the heart of a lot of this.
And there are a lot of disabled parents, but we are nearly culturally invisible, which is weird, given how many of us there are.
I think that's absolutely recognisable on multiple levels. I know we didn't originally discussing this, but I don't know if you'd like to reflect on anything you'd like to see change, to see that around sort of acceptance and awareness.
I would really like picture books in which mum or dad is disabled, but in which this is not the whole point of the book. They just happen to be. Because you can totally see how that could become an issues book. And while there is nothing entirely wrong with issues books, it's much better politically for the disabilities to be incidental. In terms of representation of what it's like to be disabled and the value of the lives of people with disabilities. I would like disabled parents to be regarded as, well, unremarkable. Mummy is disabled on roughly the same level as, well, mummy has brown hair. Because the first example of representations of disabled parenthood I remember, this is long before I was a parent, but there was a Channel 5 documentary called Will They Drop the Baby? And that is the kind of voyeuristic critical situation we're in. All I can say is that I hope the comedian with cerebral palsy, his family were in that programme, got paid a lot, because I'm not sure that any amount of money would be worth being subjected to Channel 5. I think that all parents are worried about being judged for their parenting. Absolutely everybody, reach. But disabled parents have an extra, especially visibly disabled parents, have an extra level of fear, because professionals are not used to them. Professionals sometimes panic. Members of the public are not used to them. The narrative around disability is you receive care, you don't give care, and you certainly don't have sex, which is a prerequisite if you could have a child. And is it I think it's prerequisite, actually. But anyway, I would like disabled parenthood to be unremarkable, because that would mean, it's a strange thing to say, I want to be unremarkable. But imagine a world in which a simple poem about taking a 5-year-old to get an Easter egg wasn't a political statement. Because for a non-disabled parent, I don't think it would be. It might be a nice poem, but it wouldn't be politically charged.
And it would also put you out of the poems on the feeding cup and the poems on the health.
My baby belongs to the health world.
That's it. I was like, this is not the right order for this word sentence, but,
Yeah.
Essentially you want to put yourself out of poem or three. And
which I'd be glad to put myself into poem. I mean, My Baby Belongs to the Health Board is a poem about early breastfeeding problems, which is something that lots of women have. And I was lucky that eventually we did learn to do it. I won't spend lots of time going into the ins and outs of that.
Separate lives live on.
But what was petrifying about that was how many women reacted strongly to it and recognised it. And this included women who were old enough to be my mother and women who'd recently had a baby. So I think maternity services need to take a long, hard look at themselves, but that's a separate issue.
Cheeky question, just as we move towards wrapping up. Would you be really willing to read or recite one of your poems for us?
Which one would be... So we have disabled person's travel card, which might be quite fun.
Yeah, let's go for that one. We've discussed that one. So let's
yeah, and it is, as you said, it's
got a sense of humour.
Crazy of your policy talking about. So
it's got a sense of humour and a challenge to it. Both of which I like.
Disabled person's travel card. Council, let me on the bus, but you let me on last week. Oh no, Miss Watt, you can't go on the bus. But we don't know where you live. So off I went to get proof of address, and I thought I'd sorted out my mess. But the council tore it up. Council, let me on the bus, but you let me on last week. Oh no, Miss Watt, you can't go on the bus, for we need a doctor's note. So I got them a note to make it clear that I'm still disabled, like last year. But the council tore it up. Council, let me on the bus, but you let me on last week. Oh no, Miss Watt, you can't go on the bus. We need 2 sick notes, not 1. The neurologist said, I know you know with cerebral palsy won't just go. Still, here's a form to tell them so. But the council tore it up. Council, let me on the bus with my lifelong reasons why. Oh no, Miss Watt, you can't go on the bus, for your picture isn't straight. So I sent a note to my MSP, and he wrote a poem in praise of me, but the council tore it up. Council, let me on the bus with my lifelong reasons why. Oh no, Miss Watt, you can't go on the bus, for you're trying to rip us off. So I showed the form to my sister-in-law, and we typed all night till our nerves were raw, but the council tore it up. Council, let me on the bus with my pile of paperwork. Oh no, Miss Watt, you can't go on the bus. We require a note from God. So I went to church and knelt to pray. God had sent me a letter the very next day, but the council tore it up. Council, stop. I've had enough. I've had all that I can stand. Oh, good. Your application went exactly as we planned.
Thank you very much for that. I enjoyed hearing that, Tran, and just reading that detail.
I think I was so pleased when it went to Jade and people recognised it, because I felt like it was doing its job.
Yeah.
Because I want people to read it and go, oh, that's me. Dreadful thing that happened to me is worth talking about. The real thing that happened to me, and I wasn't just hearing. And I also think that people who haven't experienced the bureaucracy around disability don't know how bad it is. They need to know
something about the public awareness of that. Thank you so much. And just as we wrap up, where can people read or listen to all of your work or access it in any format insert here?
Well, You can find important information enclosed, which is my revenge poem on British gas for the cost of living crisis, on the Poetry Archive. There's a video of that, and it's also in print on the website. You can read some of my poems at wordgathering.com, which is an American magazine of disability poetics. And there are various videos of Pregnant and Squint on YouTube. And of course, if you want the print edition, you can buy it from Blue Dial Press, and there are 4 poems on the publisher's page, including Noble and Disabled Person's Travel Card. There's RNIB Bookshare, which is where you can get a wide variety of formats, and not currently, but the audiobook for the RNIB reading service, Daisy Audiobooks, is in production.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking time to speak to me today. It's much appreciated. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.